At 10:42 a.m. on March 18, 1945, Ensign Jack Chambers took off from the deck of the USS Enterprise, his F-6F Hellcat roaring down the flight line, tail lifting against the wind of the Philippine Sea. He was 22 years old. His call sign was Blue 4. The target that morning, a Japanese convoy near Kyushu. It was supposed to be a routine strike, a run, a drop, and a turn home. But in war, routine was a lie. The Hellcats flew in formation, sunlight flashing off their wings. Below them, the ocean looked like a sheet of hammered steel, silent, calm, and waiting. Chambers had flown 18 missions before. He knew the smell of oil, the hum of the engine at 2,400 RPM, the way the wings trembled just before a dive. But he also knew something else, that every time you left the carrier, there was a chance you wouldn't see it again. They crossed the coast of Kyushu at 11:13. The radio chatter tightened. Anti-aircraft bursts spotted the sky like black flowers. Chambers banked right, dropped to 6,000 feet, and rolled into attack position. Ahead of him, the Japanese freighter Koryu Maru was burning, already hit by rockets from the lead division. Then came the sound that every pilot dreaded, the sharp, hollow thud of flak hitting metal. The Hellcat shuddered once, twice, and fire blossomed beneath the cowling. Inside the cockpit, the temperature jumped instantly. Oil sprayed across the windshield, igniting as it met open air. The engine coughed, roared, then screamed like a living thing. Chambers reached for the extinguisher lever. Nothing. Flames climbed the instrument panel, licking his gloves. He could have jumped. At that altitude, he had time. But he didn't. He throttled back, leveled the wings, and turned toward the sea. "I can make it back," he said into the mic, though his voice barely registered through the static. The flight leader's reply was drowned by wind and fire. For 11 minutes, the burning Hellcat flew low over the ocean. Witnesses aboard the USS Enterprise would later describe seeing a comet trailing black smoke and orange flame coming in from the east. The deck crew thought it was a crashing plane. They sounded the alarm, shouting for rescue crews to clear the landing area. But the comet didn't fall. It lined up perfectly with the carriers decked up by now. Chambers could barely see. His goggles were cracked. The cockpit was an oven. His skin blistered on both hands, but he kept his grip on the control stick. His training took over: speed, angle, rate of descent, pure instinct, no thought. At 11:28, the ship's crew saw the impossible. The burning Hellcat lowering its gear. The tires were melting before they touched the deck. He was coming in alive. The landing signal officer stood frozen for half a second before waving him in. "You've got in. You've got in," someone shouted from the bridge. The Hellcat touched down at 130 knots, bounced once, twice, caught the third arrestor wire, and stopped. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the aircraft exploded. The fire crews were already running. The explosion blew Chambers clear of the cockpit, throwing him across the deck. His flight suit was on fire. Two sailors tackled him, smothered the flames with asbestos blankets, and dragged him to the edge. He was alive, barely. The deck logs record that he spoke only once before losing consciousness. He whispered, "Did I make it home?" He had. The aftermath became legend aboard the Enterprise. The deck was scorched black. The Hellcat was unrecognizable, nothing but a burned-out frame, the Navy star barely visible through the soot. And yet, in the official record, it read simply, 11:28 a.m., aircraft landed successfully, pilot recovered, no emotion, no description of the fire or the men who ran into it, just landed successfully. Chambers was airlifted to the hospital ship USS Solace. Third-degree burns covered 40% of his body. He drifted in and out of consciousness for days. Doctors didn't think he'd make it through the week, but he did. When he woke fully, he couldn't remember the landing. Only the sound, the pitch of the engine as it fought to die, the vibration of the controls, the firelight reflecting on the sea. The Navy gave him the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor. He refused to attend the ceremony. His only request was that his aircraft not be rebuilt, that the wreck stay on the ship as a reminder that some machines finish what we start. The men of the Enterprise kept the scorched Hellcat on the deck for 3 days before it was finally pushed overboard. As it slid into the sea, the crew lined the rails in silence. No band, no speeches, just the sound of the Pacific swallowing another story. But even as it sank, the legend began to rise. They called him the pilot who landed on fire. Some said it was adrenaline. Some said it was skill. Others whispered it was something beyond that, the machine itself fighting to come home. In the weeks that followed, other pilots claimed to have seen something strange during late patrols, a faint orange light skimming just above the waves, heading toward the horizon where the Enterprise once sailed. They joked that it was Jack's ghost still trying to land, but no one really laughed. When the flames were finally out, and the deck was cleared, the Enterprise fell silent. The men who'd witnessed the landing didn't speak much that day. In the logbooks, the event was reduced to a sentence. But in the hearts of the crew something unspoken lingered, a sense that they had seen the line between human will and mechanical obedience blur into one. Ensign Chambers lay below deck, drifting in and out of morphine dreams. His hands were wrapped to the elbows, his chest bandaged in layers of gauze that turned crimson at the edges. The ship's doctor, Commander Rains, later recalled, it wasn't pain that kept him awake. It was restlessness, the kind that comes from someone who isn't ready to stop flying. The official Navy board convened 2 days later. Their first question: how did a burning Hellcat make a controlled landing without exploding midair? Flight engineers studied the wreckage before it was sent overboard. They discovered that the engine, though heavily damaged, had continued to generate thrust even as the main oil lines burned through. The firewall had partially melted but held barely. The landing gear had been lowered manually, the arrestor hook deployed automatically from inertia. It was, as one engineer put it, a symphony of luck and stubborn physics. But others aboard the Enterprise had another explanation. They said it wasn't the plane. It was Jack Chambers. Chambers had been quiet since his transfer to the hospital ship. When a correspondent asked how he'd managed to land, he shrugged. "I just kept the nose down and the wings level," he said. "You can't think about dying and flying at the same time." His voice was soft, his eyes hidden behind layers of bandage. He couldn't see light for several weeks, yet he asked to be informed every time the Enterprise launched or recovered aircraft. The sound of arrestor wires snapping under tension became, in his words, the heartbeat of home. By late April, he began to recover. He walked again, though his movements were stiff. The Navy offered him a medical discharge. He refused. "If my hands still work," he told his commanding officer, "then I'm still a pilot." He wouldn't fly again. But he trained others, younger pilots who never saw the sky over Kyushu, who never smelled burning oil or felt the deck shudder under the weight of returning aircraft. Chambers taught them what no manual could: the rhythm of survival. One trainee remembered his words: "Courage isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to keep your hands steady when everything is burning." Meanwhile, the Enterprise kept fighting. In April, kamikaze raids intensified. Each day brought new alarms, new columns of smoke rising over the sea. The men on deck kept a piece of Chambers' Hellcat, a fragment of scorched aluminum shaped like a wingtip. Someone etched into it, "For the one who flew through fire." They hung it near the ready room door. Every pilot who passed it tapped it once for luck before takeoff. When the war ended in August 1945, the Navy released casualty figures. More than 12,000 carrier pilots had died in the Pacific. Chambers' name wasn't among them. He went home to Iowa, married a nurse who treated him aboard the Solace, and worked as an instructor at Pensacola. He never spoke publicly about his last flight, not once. The newspapers wrote short pieces. "Hero pilot survives fiery landing," they said. But Chambers refused interviews. When asked by a reporter in 1947 what kept him alive that day, he simply said, "I had a ship to get back to. That's all." 20 years later, in 1965, the Navy declassified a report titled Incident 1128, Recovery of F-6F-5, March 1945. Inside, there were photos, grainy, black and white, showing a column of smoke over a flight deck, a bore of motion, and a single pilot being pulled from the wreckage. At the bottom of the report, someone had handwritten 3 words in faded blue ink: "He made it home." No signature. When Chambers died in 1973, only a few former shipmates attended his funeral. But among them was Chief Petty Officer William Red Hughes, one of the deckhands who'd run into the flames that morning. He placed a small, tarnished Navy pin on the casket. It was the same one he'd worn the day the Hellcat landed. After the ceremony, a journalist asked Hughes why he'd come. He looked at the headstone for a long moment and said, "Because he didn't crash. He came back." That's what we all hope to do. In 1988, the U.S. Navy formally recognized Ensign Jack Chambers' flight as one of the most extraordinary landings in carrier aviation history. The citation reads, "For exceptional airmanship, composure, and valor in the face of certain death, an act which defied both fear and physics." Today, visitors to the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola can see a restored F-6F Hellcat painted in the same markings as Chambers' plane number 404. On the displayed plaque, the description is short, clinical, almost cold. Aircraft landed successfully under fire. Pilot survived, but behind the polished metal and the clean lines, there's something invisible. The smell of burning oil, the sound of rivets popping under heat, the image of a man who refused to let go of the controls, even when his world was on fire. Some say the courage of war is in the medals, others say it's in the men who come home. But maybe, sometimes, it's in the seconds between the two, the thin, flickering line between control and chaos, between life and the silence that follows. Jack Chambers lived in that line, and for 11 burning minutes, he never crossed it. The ocean forgets quickly, ships vanish, their names fade, and the water closes over them like a curtain. But some stories, a handful, refuse to sink. They stay afloat in the silence between history's official words. Jack Chambers' name never appeared in school books, nor in the Navy's grand documentaries. His flight wasn't a turning point, not a battle, not even a victory. It was something quieter, the proof that courage can exist in the most impossible, personal moment, when the world burns around you and you don't let go. For 11 minutes. His cockpit was an inferno. Flames poured through the seams, instruments melted into glass, oxygen burned from the air. And yet, through it all, his hands held steady. No one trained him for that. You can't write a manual for the human instinct to finish what you start. In the months after the war, the Hellcat became a relic, replaced by jets, forgotten in hangars and boneyards. But to the men who fought in them, those machines were alive. They weren't just aluminum and rivets. They were extensions of will. You fed them fuel, they gave you flight. You gave them fear, they gave you home. The engineers who studied Chambers' landing later said the odds of survival were less than 1 in 10,000. But the numbers never told the truth. The truth was that war has always depended not on odds, but on men like him, the ones who refused to stop even when stopping makes sense. When he returned home, people called him a hero. He always shook his head. "Heroes get medals," he said once. "I got lucky." But it wasn't luck. It was control. The kind that separates panic from purpose. The kind that keeps a man's hands on a burning stick and turns a doomed flight into a landing. If you look at photos of the USS Enterprise from March 1945, you can see the faint outline of burn marks on the flight deck. They were never sanded away. The crew refused to paint over them. They said the marks reminded them that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it limps back home, wrapped in smoke and silence. Somewhere in those blackened patches of steel lies the shape of a man's will, and the story of a plane that didn't want to die. 80 years later, the metal is gone, the ship dismantled, the sea indifferent once again. But the idea remains. Every pilot, every soldier, every man who ever faced a moment where everything burns, still carries a trace of that morning over Kyushu. The memory of a single flight that proved something no metal ever could, that even when everything you love catches fire, you can still find your way home. Narrator closing voice. This was the story of Ensign Jack Chambers, the man who landed on fire. A reminder that courage doesn't begin with orders, and it doesn't end with survival. Sometimes, courage is just holding the line between fear and duty long enough to make it home. The screen fades to black. The last sound is the hum of an engine, distant, fading steady.